All right, let's dive into one of the weirdest, most argued over passages in the entire Bible, the very beginning of Genesis chapter 6. It's this short, super cryptic story about the sons of God and the daughters of men that honestly has been tripping people up for thousands of years. So today, we're going to break down this ancient debate.
It all kicks off with this verse. Right before we get to the famous story of Noah's Ark, the Bible just drops this bombshell. The sons of God see human women, think they're attractive, and just take them as wives. It's a pretty wild scene that immediately makes you go, wait, what? And that leads to the two big questions at the heart of this whole thing. Who exactly were these sons of God? And what about their kids, the infamous Nephilim? To even begin to answer that, we've got to unpack the two major interpretations that have been battling it out for centuries.
So here's our game plan. First, we'll lay out the mystery. Then we'll introduce our two main contenders in this debate, what's known as the Sethite view and the divine beings view. After that, we'll put them head-to-head and look at the actual evidence from the text. And finally, we'll explore why this ancient argument has massive implications for how you read the entire Bible.
Okay, first up in the ring, contender number one, the Sethite view. This is a purely human interpretation that really took off in the church after the 4th century, and for a very long time, it was pretty much the standard explanation.
The core idea here is pretty straightforward. This whole story is a human drama. In this view, the sons of God aren't supernatural at all. They're just the good guys, men from the righteous family line of Seth, Adam and Eve's third son. And the daughters of humankind? Well, they're women from the wicked family line of Cain. So the great sin here was the mixing of these two bloodlines, the good line marrying into the bad one. But here's the thing about the Sethite view, and this is really important. It's built on a whole series of assumptions. You see, the Bible never actually calls Seth's line the sons of God, and it definitely never calls the women daughters of Cain. These are all ideas layered on top of the text centuries later, really to come up with an explanation that keeps everything on a human level. And that brings us to our second contender, the divine beings view. Now this one is much, much older. In fact, it was the universal view. It's how the biblical writers themselves understood it, and it was the standard way all Jewish readers interpreted this passage for centuries before and after Jesus. This interpretation takes the text a lot more, well, literally. The sons of God are exactly what they sound like. They're members of God's heavenly host, divine angelic beings. And their sin was a massive transgression, a cosmic foul. They crossed a boundary they were never meant to cross, leaving their heavenly domain to have relationships with human women, a total violation of God's created order. And unlike the Sethite view, this position isn't based on assumptions. It's actually built on a mountain of historical and textual evidence. Seriously, every known Jewish writing from that period that even mentions Genesis 6 interprets it this way. And most importantly, as we're about to see, the authors of the New Testament believed this exact same thing. Okay, so we've got our two contenders lined up. Now it's time for the main event. Let's put these two views to the test and actually look at the evidence inside the Bible itself. Which interpretation does the text actually support? This slide just lays out the battle lines perfectly, doesn't it? On the left, with the Sethite view, everything gets a purely human, almost metaphorical meaning. Sons of God means good guys from Seth's family. Daughters of humankind means bad girls from Cain's family. But on the right, with the divine beings view, the terms are taken more directly. Sons of God are divine beings, daughters are human women, and the Nephilim? They're the giant, unnatural offspring from that union. So the first and most obvious place to look for clues is context. How is this exact phrase, sons of God, used everywhere else in the Old Testament? Well, the evidence is pretty overwhelming. In the book of Job, the sons of God are members of a heavenly council. In fact, they were around shouting for joy at creation, before humans even existed. In the Psalms, they are part of God's divine assembly. Every single time the phrase is used, it refers to divine, supernatural beings, never humans. And this isn't just an internal biblical thing. This language would have made perfect sense to the people hearing it back then. In texts from nearby cultures, like the city of Ugarit, you find a nearly identical phrase, the sons of El, and it was used to describe the lesser gods in their divine pantheon. So an ancient Israelite hearing sons of God would have immediately thought of members of the heavenly, spiritual realm. But maybe the single most powerful piece of evidence comes straight from the New Testament. The author of the book of Jude is writing about rebellion, and he pulls out this example. He talks about angels who abandon their proper home
and were locked up in chains as a result. This is a clear, direct reference to that ancient supernatural understanding of Genesis 6.
And that really is the bottom line here. For the first few hundred years of the church, the divine being's interpretation was the only game in town. The writers of the New Testament, guys like Peter and Jude, just accepted it as fact. This whole idea of godly Sethites and ungodly Cainites, that was a much, much later invention.
On top of that, some of the arguments you need to make to even hold the Sethite view are, well, they're logically flawed. For instance, some argue that Cain wasn't Adam's true son because the text doesn't use the phrase image and likeness for him. But that's what's called an argument from silence. As one scholar puts it, it's a textbook non sequitur. It's a conclusion that just doesn't follow from the evidence.
Okay, at this point, the evidence seems to be leaning pretty heavily in one direction. But this isn't just about winning an argument. The real question is, so what? Why does any of this matter? Well, it matters because if you accept the Bible's original interpretation, it completely reframes the entire story. To really get the implications, we have to understand this Hebrew word, Elohim. We usually just translate it as God, but it's a much bigger concept than that. It's less about a unique set of attributes and more about a place of residence. And Elohim is any being whose proper home is the spiritual, non-physical realm. So yeah, that includes Yahweh, the God of Israel, but it also includes angels, demons, and even the spirits of humans who have died. And Psalm 82 gives us this absolutely stunning peek behind the curtain. It shows Yahweh, the God of Israel, standing up in his divine council and passing judgment on the other Elohim, the sons of the Most High. He had given them authority over the nations, but they ruled corruptly. And so he sentences them, these divine beings, to die like mortal humans.
And this is where all the pieces come together. The sin back in Genesis 6 wasn't just about a forbidden marriage. No, it was one major event in a much larger cosmic rebellion. You have these fallen divine beings who corrupted humanity, which then accelerates the wickedness that leads to the flood. And the story doesn't even end there. Suddenly, the entire plot of the Old Testament, from the command to wipe out giant clans in Canaan to prophecies about a final cosmic battle, is reframed as one long war between God and these rebellious spiritual forces. Which leaves us with a final, kind of chilling thought. This isn't just about one weird story in Genesis anymore. It suggests that just beneath the surface of the biblical stories we think we know, there's a much bigger, much stranger supernatural conflict playing out. And it forces us to ask a really profound question. If we've been missing this foundational piece of the story all along, what else have we missed?